do you think we are getting closer to a potential ceasefire, hostage for prisoner swap agreement between Israel and Hamas? Where do we stand right now?
Thanks, Dan. Good to be here in these challenging times. I hope that we are getting closer. I would describe it as a truce and not a ceasefire. Words are important here in terms of the different types of meanings they have to different people. And I say truce because it is hard to imagine Israel not continuing in one way or another to find routes to go after the top leaders of Hamas on the military terror side who engineered what befell Israel on October 7th. At the same time, as you know, tremendous pressure, understandably so, to get out the more than 100 hostages that have been held since October 7th. As well as obviously the very deep concerns about innocent civilians on both sides who have been damaged, are being hurt, have been killed because of Israel's actions to go after Hamas.
Indeed, and what we see is those hostage lives hanging in the balance as these negotiations continue to unfold. Mara, I wanted to ask you about the domestic political situation in Israel as well, because Prime Minister Netanyahu is adamantly opposed to a two-state solution, and this is really at odds with the Biden administration in the United States and also key countries in Europe as well, who are all now on side with pushing for a two-state solution. In fact, there are even some members of the Israeli cabinet and Netanyahu's own war cabinet that are now concerned about the strategy and clearly concerned about his direction moving forward. So what is the long-term pathway to peace in your view, and how do we get there?
So I look at not only a pathway to peace, but more immediately critical for all of the parties in the region and for the United States and for Europe, as you note, is a pathway to a more secure Israel and security for Israelis and Palestinians alike. Because to be clear, the more than 5 million Palestinians who are in Gaza and the West Bank together, very few are actually active members of Hamas or actively support Hamas. And this is particularly so in Gaza, where Hamas has had control for the amount of time they have had. The challenge is how to get both Palestinians and Israelis to believe that they will ultimately be more secure in two separate states, in two separate entities, and that they each should have the right and ability to achieve that path. So that is part of the work of the international community, of countries in the region, for sure, in the Middle East region, as well as Europeans and Americans. And I would say it should also be of those countries who are bringing actions at the UN or at the ICJ. If we could just focus instead on how to get both parties aligned on having two states side by side, both secure, and that is possible. I would just note, you mentioned Prime Minister Netanyahu's comments. Yes, he is publicly, adamantly against two states. He has at various points in the past not been so. He is movable. What is more important is that the polity of Israel ultimately is movable depending on who leads that country and how they lead it. And as you noted, there are fractions within his cabinet right now, less on the issue of two states and more on how Israel can be most secure and how effectively Israel can prosecute the conflict against Hamas, where he has former military chiefs of staff who have a very different view than he does at this point about what's most effective.